Ready?
Ready.
Okay.
Fay, what you've been saying about both the internal dynamics of SNCC and the movement and the connections and relationships between the movement and the folks in the community, just very, very valuable, really important. In this way, you were looking for a way to work for change, and in the midst of it, you are changed as well.
Definitely.
As you think about some of that experience, how would you describe some of the ways that you were changed in it, Fay?
Well, I think I realized what power can be, how powerful people are, how individuals are powerful. For example, I learned the power of women. I mean, I knew my aunts.
Yes.
I knew some other people in my community.
Yes.
But in terms of just women, I mean, the communities I had access to, or other people that I knew had access to in SNCC, that women were so strong that there was no situation, I'm sure, if anybody talks about it, that women didn't rise like cream to the top. You know, it's like, and I don't know if they ever got credit for the power. I mean, there were a few like Mrs. Baker, Mrs. Parks,
You too.
Sister that became mayor out of Mississippi,
Yes.
Gray, Victoria. The people in, like Ruby Doris Smith Robinson, and other people whose names I can't even call right now. But they were so strong, and they were so giving, and they were so serving, and it was so natural. It wasn't like contrived or I'm gonna be strong today. And how many of them, maybe because they felt much probably what I felt. They had to do something. They had children, they had families, they had lives they wanted to lead. And also for their husbands and for their sons, certain things they didn't want to see visited upon their children or husbands because they're male, because they're black, or just because you're female, it may not happen to you, maybe, but it's gonna happen to your man. No, when we don't see that separation. And I think and I often think about why black women per se have not separated off into a women's movement. And my own analysis is that we find it difficult to separate ourselves from our men. We want to do things with our men. We want them to participate. We don't want to be a separate force. And that's not to put down anybody else, because people do it different. But I think a lot of African women just find it real hard to separate themselves from the structure of men, women, and children. And when we're talking about struggle, we're talking about for everybody, for all of us, everybody, including those people who may have come in association with us, not just ourselves or a separation. And I've run into a few black women in the quote unquote modern day time in the 90s who have separated themselves for whatever reason. And I remember I was in Hungary, in Budapest, and we were at this women's shelter, and this was 1995. And I said to these ladies, there were some Hungarian women there, there was a white woman from America who was there volunteering because she wanted to do work with the domestic violence there. There were a couple African American sisters who were with our group who were there. And I said, this is very interesting. I feel so stimulated, you know, I was all fluttery and stuff. So I said, I want to present an idea and to see what you think about it, because I haven't had a group that I could present it to. So they were open for it. So I said, I would like to see the women's movement open up to men, so that, I said, not that men should take it over. They don't have to be in your organization, but I think we should find a way to include them, because little boys get raped, little boys get molested, little boys are assaulted, and if we just continue with the little girl thing, that weakens our effort rather than strengthens it. And I was surprised. The young woman from America, the African American, she just went off. She could not even think of the idea, the tolerated. And so there are people who can think like that. But the other ladies thought that the idea might have some merit, and they would give us some thought, and we discussed some things back and forth. But this one young lady, she was just irate that I even said it, which is okay.
So many of your experiences connect up with each other, and you come out of SNCC, you come out of Alabama, you find yourself in Hungary, and there are connections.
Oh yeah, wouldn't have been in Hungary if it had not been for the movement, because for what? I wouldn't have known to go to Hungary or had no need to be there. But yes, you're right.
The movement was a real education for you, wasn't it?
It still is. Because the associations I made, some of the very dynamic people, many of whom you know, that you're still in contact with, probably have done interviews with, sharp mentally, sharp physically, sharp about their attitudes on life. And I feel like I'm more connected to those people. And a lot of us haven't seen each other in years, but I know they're there.
Connected,
Yeah.
Could you just go back for a little bit to Greene County and tell us what you were doing there? What was your work?
As a field secretary, going out to the counties, visiting people, talking about movement, talking about struggle, talking about voting, talking about why we were there and why we were there knocking on their door and wanted to get involved. And sometimes you spend a long time at one person's house, because when you work the counties, like in SNCC, we had one car. At CLC, I think they had a van or something like that. And the one driver would take you to this area you're going to work for that day. And they would drop you off in that area. And because you're in a farm area, nothing is close. So you work the area you could get to for that day, and then at dusk, you'd meet, and the car would come back and pick you up. So you just visited it, and you tried to show people what struggle was about and why it was good for them to invest their efforts in that struggle, because it was going to benefit not only them but all of us.
So how do you show people what struggle is about? What do you mean by that?
Well, I was mostly a student, so I mostly didn't do too much talking, because I considered myself still new to the movement, and I felt that I should be learning rather than, talking like I knew what I was doing. So I was more or less a follower and a student at that time of Cynthia, because she had been in the movement for quite some time, and she was a project director. And so we would visit people on the farms, people who were plowing their fields, and we would talk to them about why voting was important, what changes might occur. And we talk about the dangers, which they lived it. We were just visiting. They were in it every day. So we weren't telling them anything they didn't know. But we talked about support systems that could be put in place, how you organize, and why it was important that people came together to do these things rather than one person trying to do it here or there, because it was less danger and you were more likely to get something done. And that's basically the way our dialogue went, along those lines. And you're talking to people who have, who didn't go to probably 4th grade in their schools, but who were very intelligent people, who were raising children and feeding them and clothing them and doing what they're supposed to do and living a life. And those are the people who made up those demonstrations. Those are the people who went to the courthouse. Those are the people who got beat up on, And it was just very interesting.
You mentioned something about somebody overturning your truck?
Oh, the guys, they were out there driving recklessly, probably too fast, and overturned and destroyed our one vehicle. Yeah. It was nothing about anybody who did something to us.
Okay.
Yeah.
We did to ourselves.
Yeah, yeah, to ourselves. And they were young and flighty and wanted to go party in Atlanta. Certainly we're going to party in Greene County. But I know the sheriff used to follow us every day and when I was working out in the county with them. And he let us know that he was there, and he would be there every day. And he said we could work in the county as long as we didn't bring no white people in to work with us. And this one guy from Detroit had come to visit our project, and he was riding. He was light complexion. He had brown curly hair, And so the sheriff pulled us over and made us get out the vehicle because he thought he was a white guy. And when he found out he wasn't, then he let us go on our merry way. But he said we could organize and work the county, because what a lot of the sheriffs didn't want to occur, they didn't want white people to see black people and white people working together.
Yes.
They didn't want that example out there before them. And that's why I think a lot of times they would beat up white people real bad when they saw them organizing with black people. They would just take it out on them because they were trying to stop that from being a trend. They did not want these lessons being brought to their environments because they were, something else had been taught. Black folks and white folks don't get along. Other folks don't get along. This is a pure environment, and they wanted to keep it that way. And I also remember in Selma, white teenagers used to come to our office time to time, and they wanted to join the movement.
Really?
Yeah, and we would tell them.
These were local people?
Local kids in Selma area. And we tell them we couldn't allow them to do that because they weren't of age. And it would cause more problems than solutions. And we told them, though, that not let that deter them, that there were things they could do in their communities, that they could organize among their friends and their associates and begin to make changes from where they were, that they didn't have to go to somebody else to do something. You could do something anywhere you are.
Did you think some of them took that to heart?
I really don't know, but I think sincerity and their spirituality that brought them to our office probably took them further. And so it's only an assumption. Yeah, I mean, I have no way of knowing.
Yes. While you were there in Alabama, both in Selma and Greene County, what was your spirit saying to you?
Said I was in a good place. That's where I met a lot of people and had a lot of associations. I don't remember anything in particular. I met Dr. King there and got to know him and Andy Young and those folks. I found there are a lot of things I didn't like. I found a lot of ministers, I don't like them because they're so officious and so bodacious and so ignorant of other people. They feel that they're ministers and therefore they are the thing. And it really irritated me a lot to see that. Yeah. I saw the field workers who worked under, I used to call them high muckamucks. They worked under the high muckamucks and they worked real good as field workers, as people community oriented towards community and oriented towards change. Then their quote unquote leadership would come in over them and just not even pay attention to them when they talked, which was, to me, was really shameful because they had all this knowledge and they were the ones out there doing the work on a day-to-day basis. And to me, those were the ones you would listen to. So it really would irritate me a lot.
You and Cynthia were essentially in leadership roles there in Greene County.
Right. She was.
And you were essentially in that Selma office, the person in the office.
Definitely.
How did you think then and have you thought since then about this whole big debate about the role of women in SNCC and whether or not you all had the role that you should have had and everything else that people have talked about?
Well, I think that most of those people who were talking weren't in SNCC and didn't know those women, but they're some of the strongest women I ever met for the ages that they were. Many of them were doing what they wanted to do. Now, there were struggles in SNCC.
Yes.
I remember a photograph I had, and I don't even know where it is now, but it was a photograph of Ruby Doris, Mildred Foreman, Judy Richardson, Mary King, and a couple other people who were sitting on the floor with these signs in the SNCC office saying, "We will overcome," and something about no more typing or something like that. And Foreman and Willie Ricks and some other folks were standing over them like, in objection to them. But the essence of it, I think, is a lot of things that men and women are trained to do and not trained to do. For example, I found that men stretched faster in some ways of making decisions than women did. Women were more likely to like seek approval or seek agreement, where the guys, they think the thought just go on forward. And I thought that was something positive. In the meetings, because I was on the exec committee and coordinating committee, and I noticed that when women would say something, they would be taken one way, and a man could say the same thing, almost the exact same words, and it'd be like, oh, really? Dash, dash, and there'd be dialogue around it. And so I used to raise the objection about, what is your problem? I said that a few minutes ago, or somebody else said that a few minutes ago. Why wasn't it taken seriously then? So we had those arguments up in there. But then we come up out of it. But to me, I was in a place where you could draw attention to it, and I thought part of my challenge was, since I recognized it, to draw attention to it and point it out, because I wasn't going to be doing that. Nobody was going to do that to me. If I say something, you better take it seriously, because I've given it a lot of thought, and it deserved a little attention. And I think other women did the same thing. Now, when Stokely was giving up the chairmanship, and a lot of people really wanted him to remain as chair, and I remember he got up on the table and he stomped. He said, I'm not going to be chair again. I don't want to be chair again, da-da-da-da. And George Ware had put me forward as chairperson. But he didn't tell me in advance he was going to do this. So it was a shock to me when they put me forward, and I hadn't been a SNCC but a minute, okay? So I didn't prepare for it. I wasn't prepared for it. I didn't organize to become chairperson. There were several women who said they didn't think a woman should be chair of SNCC because they didn't think SNCC was ready for it or that the world was ready for it, meaning that the press pays more attention to a male figure than it would a female figure, which is probably true. And I never got angry at them. I was just surprised at that stance. But I try to understand where somebody else is coming from other than just myself. But I wasn't running for chair. I just been put in that position.
Yes.
So I'm dealing with these interweaving factors and dealing with these two women who got up and said this. I was surprised because if it hadn't been me, if it had been another female, they could have said Fay didn't have enough experience. But I didn't understand them saying, we're not ready for a female. But I could understand them saying the media is not ready. And I had experienced the media on many occasions, and I knew something about what they were saying in that they loved Stokely, because Stokely, every time he put on a camera and he opened his mouth, he'd go to talking. And a lot of people probably benefited from that. I don't think our organization did, but I think people in other situations did, because maybe they needed to hear somebody do that or say those things at those times.
Why do you think the organization didn't benefit?
Because before that, before Stokely, the organization paid more attention to its projects. The chairman was John Lewis, but he was spending a lot more time with SCLC, and that used to irritate me too, because the organization itself needed its chair and it needed its people to work its system. And you couldn't work it in combination with your chair being always dealing with another organization's attitude and their system of ministers and their directions. And that just didn't make sense to me. But at the same time, the organization was paying more attention to its projects. To me, the projects were SNCC, not the SNCC office in Atlanta. The SNCC office in Atlanta was to service those projects and those people who worked those projects. Keep them with cars, keep that money being raised, keep that system in place, keep them out of danger, keep an attorney available or money's available to get them out of jail or whatever is necessary to run that organization. And when Stokely became chair, he was very charismatic, very good speaker, very dynamic, extremely aggressive, and that took the day. So then people became paying more attention to that, but see, SNCC had not changed. It hadn't become that aggressive. So your chair becomes that aggressive, but your organization hasn't. It causes conflict in the organization, and I think it causes conflict in money raising, and then causes conflict in terms of taking care of your projects. And I think that went downhill.
Can I reverse wind us for just a bit? Somebody has been coming to my mind that I want to see if you can tell us anything more about. I was fascinated by this Charles Smith in San Francisco. Was that his name?
Mm-hmm.
You come to the door and tell him what you're doing.
I'm invited in, yeah.
And he says, you got better things to do than that, and I'm going to help you. Who was this man? Did you ever find out who he was that would bring that kind of thing out of him?
No, not in that sense. I lived with him for several months in that house. But everybody went their own direction. You know, Charles was an actor. That was his mainstay. He was a very intelligent man. He probably stood about 6'3", tall, attractive, very independent. Everybody in that house was very independent. So, so they didn't pull on me and I didn't pull on them. I came independent, they were independent, and we maintained that. But we provided an environment so everybody had a place to live, and everybody went their separate ways. I never even saw him act in a play, you know. I wasn't in the play, so it didn't even matter, but it was fine. We respected each other, we got along, and there was no hassle to meet 4 strangers and to come together like that. But no, I never knew. Charles was very intelligent, he was well read, but I have no idea in terms of spirituality aspect of it. But he knew, maybe he knew something about the business. Maybe he knew that I shouldn't be out there selling. And I would say the same thing to somebody else. You don't need to be selling those magazines with that company because they're not about anything. That's just a sham. You need to get up off of that and do something else. And I've said that to people over the years for different reasons, different circumstances. If I was able to identify that was a bad place for them to be. I remember there's one guy who used to come to me in Atlanta when I moved there, and he was under the leadership of a person in a particular religious effort. And he would come and he would dialogue, and I didn't know he was talking about this situation. I really didn't know he was talking about his leader. My thing, I just talked to him directly, and I said, well, you shouldn't be up under anybody who doesn't allow you to have some thought of your own and direction of your own. And I would talk in the way I talk. And so about 6 months later, he came back and he said, thank you. I said, thank you for what? And he thanked me for the conversations we had and the directions we had. And he left this person and became independent again, so he could think his own thoughts and deal with his own family in the way he wanted. And I was surprised because I didn't have an intent. I wasn't trying to direct somebody else's life, but that's what he got from it.
I have a question in a slightly different direction. Could you tell us how Malcolm's life and death affected you?
Well, when I lived in Harlem at Lenox Terrace, I used to see Malcolm on the street all the time. And I was impressed, even though I was apolitical. There are certain things that came to me as being fair. And the thing about Malcolm, he seemed to be such a fair person. He seemed to be consistent. He didn't seem to have hostilities. The things he would talk about, you could look at him in the history books and see the dynamics and the truth of what he was saying. He didn't just call people names to call them names. He talked about the situation and called that a name and was able to define it. And another skill he had, I think, was he was able to talk on a level that anybody that heard him could understand it. You didn't have to be a grade school graduate or a high school graduate. You could understand the dynamics of what this man was talking about. I never met Malcolm in Harlem. He would go to Chock full of Nuts or something 222 or something around the corner. I can't think of it. It was a shop, restaurant. But he only had about 4 or 5 security people with him. It wasn't like 20 people, and everybody wasn't guns drawn, and everybody didn't look hostile if you looked like you want to talk to him. I liked that because it let me know this was a person that was secure in himself. I met Malcolm I met his wife, rather, one of my roommates, when I moved in another apartment in Lenox Terrace with another young lady that I knew there, met there. She was very good friends with Malcolm and very good friends with his wife and had known him from years. His wife used to come by, and I liked her because she just looked like a regular black woman. And I liked the fact that this beautiful, dynamic, aggressive, heroic person had chosen this gorgeous woman who looked like me to a certain extent. Yeah. Brown and regular and not arrogant, not snobby person as his mate. And that showed me something else about him.
Zahara says the same thing.
Does she?
That she said that she knows a lot of black women who, in addition to everything else that they respected about Malcolm, there was something about the fact that he chose Betty Shabazz.
A woman
right.
who was independent.
That's right.
Who was nobody's slave mentality, his included, who had skills of her own, and was practicing them.
And who looked like she did.
Yeah,
that's right.
Exactly.
Like
she wasn't a little skinny thing with no little short skirts, somebody's glamour idea. Right. So yes, definitely, I can agree with what you just said. I met Malcolm in Tuskegee. I was still on the Selma Project at that time, and the people in the project, we found out Malcolm was going to be speaking at Tuskegee, and we wanted him to come to Selma. So somebody said, well, who wants to go? Who volunteers? So I said, well, I'll go. And Silas said, I'll go. So Silas Norman and I, we volunteered to go to Tuskegee to make our acquaintance to Malcolm. We got there. He was speaking in this massive hall, and I remember the impression, I can see it now, it was packed with students. And students were even sitting up on the window sills. Every space that could be garnered was garnered. And he spoke, and then after he spoke, he answered questions longer than he spoke. So he had dialogue. And people I heard speak for a lot of times, a lot of occasions, they spoke, they gave you the word, and then they split. Like they give you the gospel. But I like the idea of somebody who took the time to share information rather than just hand it down from on high. After that, we got a chance to meet him, and he invited us to stay that night, because we were going to drive back to Selma. He asked us to stay on the campus with him at the guest house, exactly. So we went there, and there were like 2 security people with him, maybe one, maybe none, I don't even know, it's just some students. There was a lady who was a friend of his, Silas and myself, and we walked across the campus, and we did some dialogue there. And I asked him about the friend from New York, Viola Hicks. And he said, Viola, he said, she's doing wonderful. He says, but the thing is, she needs to be down here with you. Now, that was a shock to me when he said that, because we were all so often told about Malcolm, thought the movement was a sham. He thought that we were wasting our time. Nonviolence wasn't about nothing. You know all those. The lines, yes. So when he said that to me, that a friend of his he thought should be where I was, I was impressed. Yeah, I was impressed that he said that and that he felt that about what we were attempting to do.
And it came so naturally.
Yeah,
from him.
Yeah, exactly. And I know we spent probably about 45 minutes or an hour or so in the downstairs area before we went up to our rooms, and mostly Malcolm did the talking. And people often ask me, do I remember what he said? And I don't. But I do remember the impact, and I remember little doors in my mind start popping, just clicking, open, because whatever he was saying, it just made so much sense.
Yes.
And I never had that feeling before, and I've never had that feeling since, of just doors in your mind just opening up. It was very strange. I remember it to this day.
That is fascinating.
It's over. Time.
Okay.